about 25 years I've been studying the question of how Africa will develop. I studied that at Harvard, I studied it at Tsinghua in China.
Part of the discussion. It's Borderline
on 99.3 Nigeria Info.
Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. I'm absolutely excited, and honestly, I know you all know me by now. When I have people that I've been wanting to talk to, you know how excited I get, so I'm going to be calm. And those of you who are regular listeners, you need to be calm too. The number you're going to be sending a message to is 0809 597 5805, or you can call 0201 277 0993 0201 465 7190. That's when I open up the lines. Right, let me tell you, we have with us, honestly, a first. It's an absolute amazing first. You would have seen her on BBC, Al Jazeera, Democracy Now!, CNN, you name it. You go on social media, go on YouTube, you would have seen her everywhere. She's easily an intellectual powerhouse. And I mean that. I'm not giving her a compliment. That's a fact. Her name... No, before I give you her name. Okay, she's a human rights lawyer and a professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, in the Department of African Studies and the program in Criminal Justice. She is an editorial committee member of the Journal for Palestinian Studies and a co-founding editor of Jadaliyya, an electronic magazine on the Middle East that combines scholarly expertise and local knowledge. I have with me, right, to the rest of you, she's Professor Noura Erakat, author, professor, human rights activist. Now she's my sister. You all can't claim her. Noura, welcome, welcome, welcome.
I am so delighted to be here. I didn't expect to come onto a program where I was going to be poured into today with such tremendous enthusiasm and light. It is very welcome. I'm excited to be on this program with you, and so excited to be speaking, you know, what has been a critical part of our struggle, you know, against colonialism, a joint struggle against colonialism, and you know, nurturing these South-South relationships. So this is a tremendous honor for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that's possibly a good place for us to start. This importance for the global South to be part of that conversation, to be part of the conversation of Palestine, because Palestine is us. What's going on, the colonization, the neoliberalism, the imperialism, the murder, the genocide, everything that's happening in Palestine right now. Those of us in Africa, we know it. We've seen it. We've experienced it. It's part of our history. How That's important is it for us, Nigeria, being the most populous black country in the world, to be talking about this?
You know, one of the things, I'm in an Africana Studies department at Rutgers University. And, you know, the thing that makes me fit there very, very well is because the history that I study of third world approaches to international law, international law as a form of colonial domination, decolonization as a history of the world, the idea that the struggle for self-determination and the third world in and of itself as a concept, and how it, you know, comes together to establish itself not as a site of de-development, but rather as a form of alternative development to the first and the second world. All of those things are a history that, you know, we can study on the African continent, and that we learn very much, and where I study a tremendous amount in order to understand Palestine and vice versa. I think what we do when we study these places is we understand the world, right? We understand the world. And so it's the most difficult thing to do in the United States, to have this conversation around colonialism, for a number of reasons. Obviously, the U.S. has established itself as a unipolar power in the world. It is empire, and in doing so, it obscures its own colonial structure. So it obscures the fact that it is a settler colony on indigenous lands. It obscures the fact that it is, in fact, a white racial settler colony that until 1964 and then more forcefully in 1965 practiced a de jure form of apartheid that, apartheid wasn't, named as such until 1973 as a crime against humanity, but had it been named already, the U.S.'s regime would have been recognized as such. And the U.S. does this in a way where it wants to establish itself as exceptional to the rest of the world. It is the youngest of, the colonial powers because it's a settler colony that's established in 1776. It tends to think of itself as pulling itself up by its own bootstraps and as functioning as a global police rather than as an actor in the rest of the world. And so within the United States, Americans have a conception of themselves as being different from the rest of the world, as being exceptional, so to speak, as wanting in their own struggle to achieve the best version of themselves, rather than understanding that there is no version of the United States that can be complete that doesn't understand the U.S.'s empire as well.
Absolutely.
So I think it's so important to have this conversation, with you and your audience, because colonialism is not a foreign concept. You know it, you live it, you see it. It continues in neocolonial forms on the continent and in in your geography.
Absolutely.
And so it's to me that's a very refreshing conversation to have, as to one where you have to start from scratch to say colonialism is the extension of sovereign authority beyond one's shores. I mean, you just got to start from scratch. And so I'm excited that we don't have to do that.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Mahmoud Khalil. Oh gosh, we have so much to talk about. But I want to talk about Mahmoud so we don't run out of time.
Yeah,
this
please.
is a Palestinian American. This is a man who is legally in America. He was a Columbia student, I believe, and he's just last week, was it earlier this week, been abducted, and is now, is in detention, possibly to be deported or have his citizenship revoked. He has a green card. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Let me just clarify that in the United States, being a legal permanent resident or a green card holder is an interim stage between having legal presence in the U.S. and to get citizenship. So he's not quite a citizen yet. He is probationarily being considered as a citizen. He would have his green card for about 5 years before he would then apply for his citizenship status. So this is the interim stage. That said, he's married to an American citizen. His wife is 8 months pregnant. He is a Columbia grad student. And so unlike those who are on tourist visas, student visas, work visas, expert visas, right? These basically what could be considered a privilege of presence. A green card holder has far more rights in the United States. And in order to be able to revoke that green card, he is entitled to due process. He is entitled to his day in court. And the U.S. initially wanted to sue him, the Trump administration, under material support for terrorism. But he has absolutely nothing. I mean, even though that's a broad provision, and I would argue, has been argued as unconstitutional, even under that broad provision, there is nothing on him that can demonstrate material support, which is why they've pivoted now to try to prosecute him under a provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 that basically is highlighting that if he had political views that are undermining U.S. foreign policy, then that, anyways, it's quite a stretch. It's quite a stretch. And what's quite evident here in this instance is that he is he was kidnapped, frankly, because he was arrested without a judicially authorized warrant. These were ICE agents that Columbia University could have prevented from coming onto their housing. And that's a story of collusion to also cover. And he was essentially disappeared because they told his wife that he was taken to a facility in New Jersey, but in fact, he was taken to a facility 1,000 miles away in Louisiana in a different state. And now today was the first time he's been able to even have a conversation with his lawyer in order to basically face the court to say, you know, he's got a habeas petition. Why is he even being held? The Secretary of State, the United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said that that the charge against them is that they don't like what he says politically. They're not even trying. There is no crime. There's not even an accusation of criminal activity, which would, you know, suffice to be able to challenge his green card status. Right? He is a political dissident. Period. And I want to emphasize, because, you know, there's a lot of hoopla and for good measure, to understand the Trump administration as having explicit fascist ambitions, right? So there's no denying that, but I need to emphasize to your audience that it was the Democratic administration that made this moment possible. Between 2016 and 2020, when Trump first, you know, serves as president of the United States, he tries very hard, you know, to tear down the university, to disembowel the welfare state, to move us into just accelerated neoliberal, you know, governance in order to reduce faculty governance over universities and academic freedom, and isn't able to successfully. But between 2020 and 2024, what you get is the Biden administration. And under that administration, a Democratic establishment waged genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Did so with $26 billion worth of financial and military support to Israel. Did so with the incessant and bottomless transfer of weapons to Israel without any oversight of U.S. law that would condition those weapons transfers, or international law to condition what Israel was doing and how it was conducting itself. It did so in order to silence dissent by cracking down on its universities and labeling their students as violent and dangerous. They labeled them by virtue of their opposition to genocide as bigots and accused them of being anti-Semitic. It was and here, you know, aside from abrogating U.S. law, you know, Secretary of State Blinken even lied under oath. The media was in collusion with the U.S. government policy. And on top of that, 84% of a Democratic base was opposing the Biden administration's policy on Palestine, and they refused to listen to them. So you get in those 4 years an amelioration of all of the guardrails that should have been in place to protect just Americans in this moment, that have been ameliorated and disintegrated to allow Trump to roll in almost on a red carpet to do what he's doing. And now the Democratic establishment, I don't know if you noticed, but only 14 out of 215 members, Democratic members of the House. They're a minority in the House vis-a-vis the Republicans, but only 14 out of the 215 have signed a letter demanding Mahmoud Khalil's release. Yeah. And the reason that they failed to do that is because they are continuing a narrative that support for Palestine is basically some terroristic, anti-Semitic activity in the United States. And it's a refusal to understand Palestine as a freedom struggle that makes the detention of Mahmoud possible, but is also making all Americans less safe. Because if Trump if the administration successfully gets away with this, no one is safe.
Well, indeed, that was going to be my next question. I had it written here. Trump, fascism, Holocaust. Connect the dots for us.
Well, I'll start with the Holocaust, right? I think that the saddest thing is that Americans, and I grew up in the United States. I was, born and raised here. I'm educated, in public schools. And so I'm subject to a public school, elementary, high school, even university, but those are subject to these curricula. We very much learn about the Jewish Holocaust as one of the most significant atrocities, in a way where where Jewish victims and survivors, at the hands of the Nazi regime become the canonical victims. Anybody that grows up in the United States understands that Jewish people are the canonical, victims of atrocity and violence, far exceeding any other group, including those that we should be studying in the United States, like those who suffered from 400 years of the institution of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, its own economy, or indigenous people on whose lands we reside and refuse to recognize that there has been a genocide against them, or any of the wars that the U.S. has fought in Korea, in Vietnam, or that it's fomented in the Philippines, in the Spanish-American War, in Cuba, anywhere, right? And so I want to start there because we understand that, which is not obviously I'm critical of it because it makes the Holocaust stand out as the most unique violence in history, when we should understand it as one of many violences
absolutely
of a colonial and imperial history, to understand how Jews were racialized, right, and excluded from whiteness, and why white supremacy remains still a threat to all of us.
Absolutely.
Right? That part is what we lose out in our education in the United States. We just learn that Jews are perpetual victims and suffered the most. But we fail to contend with what threatened Jewish people. Like, how is white supremacy as an institution and an ideology the most significant threat, approved itself to be the most significant threat to Jewish people? And we still haven't learned it. Nobody understands that. Nobody understands what anti-Semitism is. It's just like a bad attitude of what you feel about Jews, but we really don't unpack it. And so you find most people not even having the language to be able to respond. So when you have now this movement that wants to say that Zionist ideology, right, which is a colonial racial ideology of Jewish supremacy and settlement on Palestinian lands, when they want to say that that's the same as not liking Jews, unfortunately, most Europeans and North Americans, I would say, have no idea how to respond.
Yeah.
Because we've never really studied. You studied, this horrible thing happening, the Jewish Holocaust, and then you study that Israel becomes the form of reparations for the Jewish people, and we have to maintain this pact in order to demonstrate the abomination of the Jewish Holocaust. But what they don't contend with is who was responsible
for that. Absolutely.
What ideology was responsible for that atrocity? And how is it that rather than contend with white supremacy, instead you have Europeans and North Americans deflecting and projecting all of that, anti-Semitic ideology onto the Palestinian people and the people of the Middle East, who have basically proposed a colonial imposition and violence on their lands and on their bodies. This is the gap that we suffer from. I find, that when I speak to audiences who are familiar with colonialism or familiar with the history of the world, right, we don't have this problem. But in North America, in settler colonial societies, so Canada, the United States, Australia, think of like European powers, right? It is a problem.
Of course.
It is. Look at Germany. Yeah. Germany, in this moment, far from learning the lesson of how is it that you make a people, you racialize the people, you establish them as outsiders, you create moral panic, that they're the reason that neoliberal governance is creating insecurity and austerity is threatening everyone. But it's really these people's fault because they don't like our way of life.
Indeed.
This is a repeat. And rather than seeing, taking the lesson, how is it that we created a racial supremacist ideology that subjected mass numbers of people to exclusion, violence, death, precarity, the promise of shorter life? How are we doing that again? There's no connection.
And
there's no connection.
Yes, and I think that's the thing, because all of a sudden now, where people only ever thought, when they thought of genocide, they either think Rwanda or they think the Holocaust. Now, everybody is having to learn that, like you rightly said, white supremacy it kills. Literally, it kills. And it's killed thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians in Palestine. And that has been possible as a result of America's licensed fascism, if you like. One could call it that. So let's talk about the ICJ. Gosh, I wish we had much time. Let's talk about the ICJ. Much as they've said, yes, it's a plausible genocide, as if we can still use that word. We still need to use that word, plausible.
Yeah, and I can talk about why. Yeah.
Yeah. They've also said that Israel's continuous occupation of Palestine is illegal, but nobody's doing anything. Are we not sick of rhetorics?
We are so sick of rhetoric. So the ICJ's jurisprudence on genocide is really, really narrow. And it's primarily predicated around how it's interpreted genocidal intent. And this is what distinguishes genocide in law and in criminal law from other war crimes, for example, that are conducted in the course of war, or crimes against humanity that can be conducted during peacetime and wartime. Crimes against humanity come to capture a lot of this, which is, the reckless or indiscriminate attack against all civilians. Then there's another crime known as extermination, which is literally the extermination of people. The distinction between genocide and, let's say, extermination and those crimes against humanity, although genocide is a crime against humanity, the distinction is that genocide includes a specific intent to destroy a group of people based on their racial, ethnical, religious, or national identity. And then you have to demonstrate that it's also associated with specific acts in order to achieve that goal through creating the conditions of life that would make it impossible to survive, through, the attack on reproductive systems to prevent a future, to actually attack people indiscriminately. What the ICJ does in this instance, when it wants to define genocidal intent, and it does this in its case 2007 of Bosnia Herzegovina versus Serbia.
Yeah.
During the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, Bosnian Muslims or Bosniaks, right? Muslim Bosniaks are subject to a massive violent campaign that sought to ethnically cleanse them and destroy them, really, in order to create a homogeneity in Bosnia that would allow, to allow Serbia or Yugoslavia to continue its sovereignty over it. I mean, this is going on across,
of course,
the former Yugoslavia. In that instance, Bosnia sues Serbia for genocide, and the case, the factual file is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Bosnians were placed on buses to be transported. Bosnian women were subject, trigger warning, were subject literally to rape camps in order to, make them unmarriageable to other Bosnian Muslim men, for example, but also so that they would produce through a patrilineal line Serbian children, right? There was, torture camps where Bosnian Muslim men had their testicles literally, I won't even describe how, but had their testicles destroyed also for this sake, where there were massive starvation campaigns. And yet, the International Court of Justice in this instance doesn't find that as tantamount to genocide. Instead, they say that this was a campaign of ethnic cleansing. And they make a distinction between ethnic cleansing and genocide and say that the only instance of genocide in this whole campaign was in
Srebrenica.
Srebrenica. Thank you. Because there they have an actual kind of, blueprint that the purpose was to destroy the Bosnians if they didn't leave at the military order. And so the precedent that the International Court of Justice sets in this case is a very, very, very thin line between genocide and ethnic cleansing that's predicated on having irrefutable proof, a blueprint that there was an intent to destroy a people, even though you can, deduce this proof from all of these, from all of these instances. Bring this now to the present.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about Israel and Gaza. And here, the first case, and your emphasis on plausibility, the court in this instance is basically reviewing this matter with a lower threshold of evidence, where they just have to establish that it is plausible that Israel is committing genocide. They're not proving beyond, reasonable doubt that Israel is actually conducting genocide. It just has to be plausible that there's enough there that you can basically order some sort of an injunction. And there is obviously enough, and the court finds this plausible genocide. The rest of the colonial powers in the Western world use that language of plausibility because the final case to be heard on its merits won't be heard probably for another 6 years. We don't know, right? And so, and in fact, I would argue that all of the repression that we're seeing in order to criminalize you even describing it as genocide is part of Israel's attempt to destroy the evidence and to undermine a political climate that would support a court's finding.
Indeed.
And these things are connected. Anyway, the Western world, the United States in particular, the UK, Germany, and Israel obviously use the language of plausibility and to basically say, well, they didn't say it was genocide. They said it could be genocide. Yeah. And we say that it's not. And so using that wiggle room, continue to send arms, arm Israel to the teeth, continue to undermine multilateral mechanisms to stop this genocide, specifically at the Security Council, continue to attack their own protesters who are trying to mobilize their governments without any sense of irony that the Genocide Convention is not drafted just merely to punish genocide, but to prevent it.
Absolutely.
If it's plausible, then everything should be done to prevent it, and yet they've done nothing to prevent it. And this is the world that we live in. This is the world that we live in where everybody is becoming less safe. Indeed. Right?
Yeah.
Because of a refusal to confront Zionist logic. Well, just basic, period. It's a refusal to confront Zionist logic. And so instead, you have now taking apart a world system that even at its strongest was not that effective in protecting people. Can I just make a distinction since we're, to talk about the Sudan
Yeah, very
here?
quickly, then I need to ask you another 2 more questions.
I know, please. But I just want to just mention the Sudan here. Obviously, the Sudan and regional involvement, and particularly the United Arab Emirates involvement in the Sudan is deplorable.
Absolutely.
Is deplorable.
Yeah.
But what I want to point out is the politics of how, genocide becomes so politicized, because before the Biden administration left office, basically in its final hours, before, its final weeks before leaving office, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken determined that there was genocide in the Sudan, that the UAE was, attacking the Masalit ethnic group in West Darfur. So, and here I'm so curious, how do they come to this conclusion? The Sudan is also suing the UAE.
Yes, indeed. They
at
are.
the ICJ,
Yeah.
which I totally support. But here, I'm curious what the United States' logic is, and they explicitly say, and here's how this is just hypocritical and two-faced. They explicitly say, well, there is enough evidence to deduce that the UAE has the intent, to support the RSF in the genocide of the Masalit ethnic group. And if you give this evidence to any group of legal experts, they would come, or judicial bodies, they would come to this conclusion. There's an interview where the anchor then asks the U.S. ambassador on international crimes, okay, but using that same logic, why wouldn't you find that Israel also is committing genocide? And she fumbles and she foils and she doesn't know how to respond until she finally says, look, that has to be decided by the ICJ. So they can't even apply the same standards that they're applying in the Sudan on genocide intent. Instead, they want to punt to the ICJ because they know that the ICJ, one, will not make the determination for years to come, and by then that outcome can be manipulated.
Absolutely. Oh my word. I need more time. I'm telling my producer, and he's like, nope, you're not getting it. We're going to have to go to news at 6. So here's the thing. Let's talk about the future of Palestine. Okay. And we know that this second phase, Israel is currently now moved their war to the West Bank. Number one. Number two, now they're fighting the war in Gaza with starvation, knowing full well that it's Ramadan and it's Lent, the holiest month for both religions. In that space, they're doing that. They've moved and keep moving the goalpost for the second phase of the ceasefire, and they keep saying Hamas is got to be gone. We're not going to do anything unless if Hamas is going to stay there, etc., etc. Why don't people allow the Palestinians? Why does everybody seem to think they have an opinion on how Palestine should look and how it should be shaped, apart from the Palestinians? I mean, I'm Nigerian. I know that even when I lived in England, if you dare do that, as a Brit, I'll ask you, since when is it your business? Who are you? But with Palestine, everybody seems to have a right, albeit they're in the UN, but nobody asked the Palestinians. And yet
nobody asked the Palestinians.
Yes. So what you see, I'm going to give you 2 minutes because honestly, they're going to scream at me soon because they're going to want me to answer the calls. What do you think we can look forward to?
I want to just say that you're absolutely right. I think one of the, Israel, even when it stopped all of its, aerial bombardment, has set in motion the conditions to make Gaza unlivable. Nobody denies that. I mean, they've attacked agricultural fields, hospitals. They've attacked, waterways. They've even attacked under the surface. There's no access to hygienic water. They then control the borders in order to starve the population. I mean, they have set in motion the conditions, which is a specific act of genocide in order to limit their possibility of life. And that's why there's an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant specifically for this purpose. Now, on the issue of why can't Palestinians speak for themselves? Precisely because of our failure. Forget the failure. It's our refusal. It's our refusal to contend with Zionist ideology. We just take it for granted that it has to be. There's no way around it, even though Palestinians are saying there have been alternative ways to ensure everybody's Jewish safety, Palestinian safety and futures, instead of dealing with the fact that there's apartheid, that there's settler colonialism, that there's a prolonged military occupation, that, all of these are the culprits. Instead, what the United States and its allies have done and Israel has done is to frame Palestinians as a problem. So the reason now Palestinians can't participate in their own self-determination, according to them, is because they themselves are the problem to be solved, not that the conditions imposed upon them are the problems to be remedied. And so we got to switch that. That has to be switched. Palestinian humanity must be centered in order to understand that, like all peoples, we have an insatiable thirst for freedom, and we have the right to self-determination, period.
Yeah, indeed. I made a note because something came into my head as you were talking, and I thought to myself, there's a narrative where, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the oppressed people are constantly expected to be pacifist in the face of violence and oppression and colonization and dehumanization all the time, every time. So when October 7th happened, every Palestinian was asked, do you condemn Hamas? It's almost like it was an electric shock thing. And nobody thought, hang on a minute, these are the oppressed people. These are the people almost, 8 decades on, generation after generation after generation, they've been deleted, let's put it frankly. How does that make you feel, though, as a Palestinian? And then, people, I know you're calling. I will answer your call once Professor Erakat answers this in 1 minute. How does it make you feel? I know they're already saying to me, you need to answer calls, and they're calling.
I'm happy to answer. Yeah, the short answer is, what people fail to realize is that when I was asked that question repeatedly across all media platforms, is how racist that question is. How racist that question is. And it was a continuing deflection of responsibility. I condemn an international system that has subject Palestinians to 7 decades of ethnic cleansing, usurpation of their self-determination, to 16 years of siege, to 57 years of occupation. And what is clearly now been declared as a form of apartheid. That is what, those are the conditions that I condemn. There was, I think that the way that the world responded was that they are desensitized to violence that's meted upon Palestinian bodies. But when they saw that violence taken out, on Israelis, and here I want to emphasize that, I wonder there was attack on Israeli civilians. I actually don't, I do not condone that, right? And I know that
of course nobody does. Yeah.
There would be a debate. Some people do believe that there's the Algerian model and so on and so forth.
Oh yes,
but I
of course,
actually,
yeah.
If we think about revolutionary thinkers, Mao Zedong and Che Guevara, and there is one can
even
have that
Nelson
discussion,
Mandela.
but for the sake of understanding what's happening here, let's say that Hamas just attacked what was their military installations, where they did attack 2 military intelligence units, right? Would the international response have been the same or different? Is this anxiety over Palestinians fighting at all, or is it about how they fight?
Absolutely.
Because I'm ready to deal with you on whether or not you want to take issues with how Palestinians fight, but I would surmise that the issue isn't about how they fight, it's that they have the right to fight at all. And that is what I think was lost in the discussion of seeking to see whether or not we condemn. And we condemn, that's basically a racist trope that, distrusts my own humanity and doesn't recognize it, whereas nobody is ever asked to condemn.
Yeah.
Nobody. No Israeli
call.
ever on television has been asked the past 16, ongoing months, do you condemn? Not one. And yet here we were subject repeatedly, basically as a litmus test. Are you human enough? Can we trust you?
That's it. That is exactly it. You can call now. I've literally got 4 minutes, I think, left. Yes, I've got 4 minutes or maybe 8 minutes left. Okay, they're already calling. All right. Hello. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello,
What's your name? Where are you calling from? And very quick, what's your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Engineer Kundayo from Ikorodu.
Yes.
I want to ask the Prof.
Yes.
About 3 weeks ago, there was this proposal by Egypt excluding Hamas from the solution, the eventual solution of the Palestinian conflict.
Yes. Sir.
What's the view of your guest on this Egyptian proposal?
Thank you very much. Thank you. That Prof calls and he is very succinct, very quickly.
Yes, thank you for the question. I will echo what a lot of Palestinian organizations have said about this, is that they refuse this proposal. They refuse this proposal, even though I think Hamas welcomed it. But Palestinian civil society has refused this proposal precisely because it suggests that Palestine should be overseen by a trusteeship and a group of technocrats rather than be subject to Palestinian governance. It's such an irony that Israel's right to govern, right, is not even questioned. Not even just its leadership, even its right to govern after committing a genocide.
Yeah.
And yet Palestinians, after being subject to a genocide, now need to, be subject to a trusteeship. So there's been a rejection of it.
Absolutely. You can call back. Sorry, I didn't want to interview Prof. That's why I didn't answer your call. Okay, you're calling back. Hello?
Yeah, this is here.
Titilokwe, go ahead. Don't make it long, Titilokwe, because we don't have time.
No. I know there's no time.
You need to speak up. Can you speak up? Speak up. You need to speak.
The shift in U.S.-Ukraine relationship, is it inspired by Donald Trump afraid of Putin or purely commercial interest? Thank you.
No, I didn't hear that. I think, right, he's talking about Putin and Trump. He said the shift from Putin, the relationship between Putin and Trump. Do you think it's about commercial interest, or is it about President Trump being afraid of President Putin?
I mean, I don't think that President Trump necessarily is afraid of anything or anyone. I think that what, he's understood himself as being able to wield, the US's economic and military supremacy in order to bully countries into what they want. I think he respects Putin as a strong man and sees that there is more to be gained through that alliance with him. Yeah.
I've got to ask you before the call. You can call. I am giving your calls priority. You can send WhatsApp to 0809-597-5805. Right. My question to you is, this week, Donald Trump was speaking about Chuck Schumer, and he used Palestine as a pejorative. He used to be Jewish, he said. Now he's Palestinian. I mean, every time one gets to a point where you think this man and what comes out of his mouth can no longer shock me. And I was one of those that thought, stop letting him shock you. We've been there. We're familiar with him. It was the first time that shocked us. We know what he's going to do now. And then I heard that. I think it was yesterday, and I thought, what?
Well, there's two things that are true. One, this is not new. Trump also called Biden a Palestinian during the presidential debates in the lead up to the elections. Yes. And so this wasn't unprecedented. The other thing that we need to focus on, and I think that's more pervasive, is the way that Palestinians, right, the racism that they suffer is so thorough and complete that calling somebody a Palestinian, one, immediately raises, and this is how we're racialized, raises the presumption of our tendency towards violence, of our irrationality, of our bigotry towards Jews. And this is all part of this racial trope that's been created so that soon you will see that even describing yourself as a Palestinian will be, somebody's going to point the finger and say, that's anti-Semitic. Yeah. Right. And this is they're making Palestinian right now appear as an enemy, trying to make Palestinians appear as an enemy to humanity in the way that terrorists are an enemy to humanity, the way that pirates have historically been an enemy to humanity. And what we have on our side is the fact that most of the world, the salt of this earth agrees with Palestinians. Indeed. And actually understands, because they've witnessed our live stream genocide, right? Understands that we are the pinnacle of humanity in the way that we were able to survive, to love, to remain committed to our lands, to one another, who were able to, salinate water and find food, to share shelter, to, dance with children, to comfort one another every single day out, where journalists went to the front line, even though they knew they were targets, where our medical professionals became heroes, literal heroes, because they had a target on their back and worked with a provision. Nobody that watched that didn't come away, absolute in profound awe. Myself as a Palestinian, in profound awe of a humanity that, I think we've only seen in this lifetime. And so hearing that on the other end should strike us as precisely what it is, which is race baiting. And an attempt to make even our existence into a problem. Indeed,
I heard just the other day, I think, on I think it was on CNN, and it was one of the, I don't know whether it was a Republican, but it was certainly right wing, and he said you wouldn't allow people to wear swastika, yet you allow them to wear kafir, and that was yet another. What is it like being American right now? Because we Nigerians were used to like, okay, you know, we get bad press, but like Palestinians were so resistant. We come out with good music. We come out and defend ourselves. We say this, we say that. But what must it feel like to be American when your president continues to do this over and over again? We have tariff wars. We have insults upon insults on, you know, sovereign countries and their leaders, irrespective of which side you're on.
You know, the one thing that gives me comfort is that I know I have never, ever believed in the U.S.'s fairy tale version of itself. And I think that one of the things, you know, that makes me as a critical scholar able to, you know, move through the world in this moment is to understand that this is actually what defines the United States, and a particular kind of supremacist violence against others and a refusal to contend with ourselves. And I know that Palestinians are not the first to be subject to this kind of violent racism in the United States. Obviously, the Japanese were interned during the Second World War, were subject to immigration quotas. Obviously, those who are racialized as Black in the United States, African Americans, have literally been subject to an institution of chattel slavery and subject to widespread vigilante and state terrorism of lynchings, of mob violence, of, you know, now we have our prison system is one that primarily targets and criminalizes Black people to sustain that racial domination, you know, the attack on immigrants and the criminalization of immigrants, but particularly immigrants of color, as not being worthy. All this is part of, I mean, I just don't see Palestinians as exceptional. I see the exception to us, our exception, is the fact that those who describe themselves as liberal, who describes themselves as anti-racist, who describe themselves as for immigration and for women's choice and bodily autonomy and for gender rights, and especially transgender safety and life. There's a big strata of those people who are actually in agreement with the right wing that Palestinians are non-human.
Indeed.
That's where we're exceptional because of that overlap. Yeah. Right. But we're not exceptional vis-a-vis a long American history, frankly, of violence and what we're seeing right now, which is a resurgent white nationalism that understands that, those who are racialized as white in the United States are likely to become a demographic minority, and who now see that their efforts to deport people, to secure the border, to fire, to, all of that they see as their right to, their own right to self-determination, without any sense of irony that, in fact, when white people, when white nationalists move to ensure those rights, they are actually fighting for a right to dominate others. In distinction from where other racial minorities, choose to represent themselves, say Black power, brown power, Chicano power, what have you, are not seeking to dominate anyone. They're seeking to overthrow a domination upon themselves. They're not seeking to be a majority. Yeah. They're not seeking to be, to oppress others. They're not seeking to criminalize, the behavior of whites. They're not seeking to control other bodies. They are literally seeking to just control themselves. And here, I don't know where we're going. Indeed. And so as an American, I'm here and I tell my, my fellow peers that our silence will not keep us safe in this moment, because it will be easier to roll over, make it easier to roll over us. There is no way through but through protest and speaking up, and that will require a tremendous amount of risk that we're taking.
Absolutely. Wow. We've got 3 minutes left. If you call now with your question in 30 seconds, I will put it to Prof. Otherwise, I'm going to use up the 3 minutes because I'm enjoying myself too much. It's kind of crazy. Right. So I'd like you to close for us on, I don't want to say positive note because I don't want it to be forced. You know what I mean? We've got to stay in this moment of realism and actually be truth to what's going on. Otherwise, we're denying all those. I keep saying, you know, I personally always feel compelled to constantly watch Al Jazeera, because the least I can do is to actually listen to the voices of those who are being oppressed. People say, oh, I can't watch it anymore. It's too painful. It's too this. Their pain, what I feel, doesn't even compare to what they're going through. So give us a message, just a message to take away with. If you can do it in like 1 minute.
Sure. No, that's
what you said, what Trump said about when that pejorative, when he used Palestine as being pejorative, it's actually being used at me in Nigeria by a friend. And he thought I would be upset. And I said, no, I claim it. Is that what you want to call me? Fine.
How did he try to use that as a pejorative?
So he said, oh, Ireti, she's the spokesperson of the Palestinians. Ooh, ah. I thought, okay, I claim it. He thought that would upset me. And what's really upsetting. What's
really upsetting, I mean, obviously this is, about Palestinians, but it's about the whole world. Why would you be okay with the slaughter of children?
Yeah.
Gaza is a population of a majority of minors.
Yeah. We have 60 seconds.
So any attack on them is an attack on children. It's a war on children. Yeah. You basically standing up to defend that is the least you can do as a form of decency.
I need to thank you, apparently, before that silly music comes on. I'm being told, you have to come back. Say yes, you're going to come back.
I hope to come back. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. It's been an absolute
Meyang. How do I say your name?
Ireti.
Ireti.
Yes.
Oh, you weren't even on the emails with me. I see what happened. Okay.
No, I wasn't.
That's why I didn't say it on the show. I didn't want to mess that up. Thank you so much for having me. You have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. 99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info.